Welcome. I'm Sister Hu. I was talking with a minister friend the other day about difficult situations people go through, and it occurred to me that a furnace is something that is often spoken of as what's, a hot, uncomfortable place that's used to purify precious metals, gold and silver and such. And using that metaphor, a lot of people have spoken of fiery trials that purify the character of a person. The problem that I'm not sure people are in quite such a hurry to deal with is that there are sounds associated with that kind of purification. Oh, for example, when you throw droplets of water onto a hot stove, there's immediately this hissing, sizzling sound as the water goes through this transformation from liquid to gas. And steam is a very powerful form of energy, but it makes a hissing noise. And so if you want to have a steam engine of whatever sort, you have to allow for all this hissing going on from time to time. Well, in the same way, when you put metal in a furnace or people in trials, there's sounds associated with that are simply natural to the process. People who are going through difficulties are going to complain, and they're going to express that they're in pain because they are. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. And that sounds rather strange, and I know if I'm the one going through the trial, it'll be real difficult for me to hear that from anyone. But what I'm trying to get at is that there are it is natural, it is normal, it is perfectly reasonable for a person who's going through difficulties to complain and whine and talk about how painful it is. They're simply being honest. The problem is that there aren't a whole lot of us who are willing to stand that close to the furnace where our friends and loved ones are being purified. Letting them go through the consequences of their own life choices, letting them learn from their own experience, letting them be wherever they're at and express whatever it is they're feeling. A lot of times what we hear is that they're very uncomfortable. And there have been a lot of things that I've gone through that at the time it was too painful and too disorienting for me to think about how it would help me in the long run. And it wasn't until much later that I was able to look back on the situation and see where I was stronger, I was a little smarter, I was able to deal with things that I hadn't been able to deal with before for having gone through that. At the time, I was the person in the furnace basically saying it's hot, it's uncomfortable, I feel like I'm being burned. But there's different ways that which we think is us gets burned away, and the pure gold that really is who we are is left behind. And it depends on whether we're able to embrace that golden part of ourselves, or whether we get so distracted by the problems of what's going on that we don't look for the gold at the time or even later. And ultimately all the gold might get tossed out with the ashes. It is difficult to look back on a painful time and say something good came out of it. I think it's better than saying it had no purpose at all, but it is difficult. We don't want to justify things that hurt. We don't want to justify things that we've identified as evil. And I have no intention of justifying them, only of saying that those things also can be transformed. That something that comes at me, something that I go through, that by all indications is bad, and may even have a bad intention for me, because of who I am, because of, in whatever way you understand this, because each of us is created in God's image. And to me, because God is real, I believe, because of all that, the possibility of transformation exists. And someone can say something really bad, and because of this spiritual goodness that is available, it can be turned into something good. We don't have to stop in the furnace. We can go beyond the furnace to when the furnace cools and we're able to rake through the ashes and find the gold that was purified through that horrible process. And that's where the treasure lies, and that's the part of it that you keep. And the ashes go out to an ash heap or spread on a garden or someplace to be recycled into the earth and become nourishment for the next generation of something that will grow there. In the moment, a lot of things hurt. In retrospect, a lot of things that hurt are gold mines, waiting for us to sift through the ashes, to sift through the dirt, to get all the other junk out of the way and find out what was so precious, what was it in that experience that even the most evil intention could not keep from happening. Even the most evil intention, to use I seem to refer to this a lot, I suppose everyone does. The most heinous example, it seems, the human race has at present of just how bad can things get seems to be the concentration camps of the Nazis during World War II. No matter how evil the Nazis' intention was, it didn't stop good things from coming out of that. It didn't stop people from discovering new meaning to life, and new ways of relating, and new ways of believing, and new ways of rising above their circumstances, and new ways of living without their possessions, and not losing track of who they were. To me, those are all very precious things. I suppose we could all wish, I should think we all do wish, that we could learn these things and acquire this gold in some much more gentler way. I don't know whether we can or not. I know that from time to time, bad things happen. But because I believe God is real and God is alive, there is something that is God, it hasn't gone away. Because I believe that, I find that I have to believe in the possibility of things being transformed. I have to believe, because there is such a thing as divine love, that there is a way for ashes and dirt to be turned into something beautiful and valuable. That because there is divine wisdom and divine presence, the myth of the phoenix is a metaphor that can be applied to any situation. The story of the phoenix basically being that it was a bird that lived for a certain length of time, at which time it would go into, it would build a funeral pyre, a pile of wood, and actually climb on the wood and light it on fire and be consumed in its own funeral pyre. And as everything burned down to ashes, in this apparent suicide, out of the ashes would rise a brand new young phoenix, as if the phoenix had somehow been reincarnated by going through this sort of fire. Metaphorically, there's a lot to draw from there. The difficulties in the trials, the Great Depression, the World War II, World War I, all sorts of different things that have gone on, loss of job, breakup of marriage, all of these things are very difficult, painful trials. Very difficult, painful testings and purifications. And we can either throw all the gold out with the ashes, or we can dare to go back and look and find something good that came out of that, and begin to build a new life upon that thing, whatever it is that we're able to find there, upon a greater understanding of ourselves, a greater wisdom about humanity, a greater empowerment for believing in what we can do and where we can go with life. It's a transformative process. It's a point of transformation. And I think it's something that's always available. What I suppose makes it the most difficult is those times when I want to go back and sift through my ashes and find the gold that has been purified of my spirit through these things. And I think many places in America, my own family as an example, but I think many, many families across America, there's a real discouragement to do that kind of questioning and that kind of probing and that kind of asking and that kind of reflecting and thinking. And if we were only digging through the ashes to cover everything with ashes and make it all dirty, that would be one thing. But if you're sifting through the ashes to find the gold, sifting through the ashes, finding out what the ashes are, what the events were, what really happened, or what does everyone think happened, and having worked through that, that's the sifting, where you begin to find the gold. You begin to find, perhaps a great aunt who wasn't liked by anyone because she went through a divorce at the time when divorce simply wasn't done. But the more you learn about this particular person, maybe you find she was an innovator, a pioneer, an independent thinking person who made a way for herself. Perhaps someone who raised a particular bunch of children in such a wise and loving way that they departed from any negative path that the family tree had set for them. And they really made something of their lives. You know, it's an interesting question, I suppose, if you went back through all the different artists and composers throughout history, Beethoven and Mozart and Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, to ask who were their teachers and where did they learn these things. Certainly an aptitude might have been inherent, but it seems to me somewhere along the way in every single one of these great artists and writers and poets and musicians' lives, there were people who nurtured them and who encouraged them to trust their own intuition in creating something the world had never seen before. And I wish that in our own time we were much more mindful of things like that, to encourage the next generation of Michelangelos and Leonardo da Vinci's and Shakespeare's and Beethoven's and Mozart's. I really do believe we have those sorts of gifted people alive today. And some of them are 5 years old, and some are 10, and some are 15. And we need to nurture that gift. It's a gift from God, I suppose you could say, a gift from the universe. That such people are born, that such people continue to be born. And I would ask, are we being good stewards with those lives that God is entrusting to us, entrusting to our cities, entrusting to our societies, entrusting to our churches? There are numerous great theologians, people who have investigated what is God, what am I, what is our relationship, and have written volumes of books trying to explore this and asking deep questions and helping us to be able to perceive a little more of spiritual realities. And perhaps there are brilliant theologians yet to come. If they're children today, I want them to know that it's okay to ask spiritual questions, that which is God will not be threatened by their questioning, but that in sharing their discoveries, the whole human race may be enriched. It is difficult to stand near anyone's furnace when they are going through it. And it is difficult not to reach your hand into the furnace to try to pull them out because they are in there yelling, "It hurts." They're in the furnace. It is their furnace. They're going through the purification. I want to be there to love them. I want to be there to encourage them, but I cannot go into the furnace for them. Their lives, some of the aspects of their lives because of their own choices, and some of the aspects of their lives because of outside forces or things beyond their control. Their lives include things that are meant for their lives. My life includes things that are meant for my life. If I love them in any sense of the word, I will give them the freedom to live their own life and to experience their own consequences. I will be a supportive friend in whatever way I can, but as much as possible I will refrain from doing things for them, because it would be like reaching into the furnace and getting my hands burned on something that I wasn't meant to touch. I don't leave them alone, but I can't live their lives for them either. And I have to understand that they're in a furnace saying it hurts because it does hurt. One of the things I'm also fond of saying, though, is that we all take turns being the one in need. And as much as I would rather it were not, because I remember too much how uncomfortable it was last time, I'm sure there will be times in the future where I'm the one who's in the furnace. And life hurts, and things are difficult, and confusing, and I don't readily have answers. And I will need someone to be there to say, just hang in there, you're going to get through this. And I understand it hurts. I understand that there's a lot to legitimately complain about. But just as much as there was a time when it was not this way, you can be sure there will be a time again when it is not this way. Just as there was a time before the Great Depression, there will be a time after. Just as there was a time before the Second World War, there will be a time after. Just as much as there was a time before AIDS, there will be a time when AIDS is but a memory. I hope we remember all that we're learning during this time. I hope we don't forget. Trying to get at this sort of feeling, this sort of understanding, this paradox that life encompasses, that there are good things and bad things, and somehow they go right next to each other. And the paradox doesn't often make sense to me with my limited perspective. But there it is, trying to teach me something. And somehow it seems to me that each side of the paradox needs the other, but I don't really understand how or why. Kind of voicing this, I wrote a song a couple years ago. I'm not going to sing it just now, but the chorus of the song stands out to me as being really relevant at this point. And that's that when fear and love are sown together like a seed in the ground, when fear and love are sown together, there is life as we've never known. And fear prevails and love grows stronger. And the rose that blooms will only bloom in the place of thorns. Paradoxes are difficult because they inherently have no final answer. They're things we keep asking about for as long as we keep asking anything. My beliefs are very eclectic, and I draw my understandings from a lot of different faiths in this world. For the moment, I'd like to draw from the Christianity that I was raised with in the Roman Catholic Church, in speaking of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Whether you believe in it as a literal story or mythology or as hearsay, to me is not so much the point. Whether it was true or not, it's a wonderful metaphor for a whole lot of things. Jesus was crowned with this ring of thorns. Metaphorically, it's been explained to me that the thorns represented the sins that he was taking upon himself to be the sacrifice, in the sense of being a sacrifice to pay for something. I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea that God needs to be paid for debts, but The paradox I'm trying to get at in bringing this up is having this person who dedicated him so much to love in combination with thorns, and when he's being crucified, having this thunderstorm going on and this dark sky. And all of that darkness and all the thorns and all the pain was the doorway to, I suppose, what you could call his next step of spiritual evolution. If he hadn't gone through all that, there wouldn't have been any Easter morning. You know, bluntly stated on many football fields in athletic programs is no pain, no gain. I don't know that I agree with that entirely either, but the metaphor is what I try to pull out of that. That it's not that we have to seek pain, it's not that we have to seek darkness, it's not that we have to seek thorns. It does seem, however, that those things do find anyone who has their eyes open and their ears open, anyone who is really living life, at some point is going to run into some thorns. Somehow, there is no path through that doesn't include that. You don't go looking for it, but somehow it's always there somewhere. But again, this goes back to the whole thing of the ashes, the thorns, the painfulness, the dark side of life that we don't want to look at and we don't want to walk into. But it's part of the picture. I once heard a Christian musician writing about the crucifixion of Jesus as something very different from what most churches today present. If I can remember how he put it fairly closely here, it was something to the effect that Christians need to remember that Jesus was not crucified on an altar between two candles, but that he was crucified basically at the city garbage dump between two thieves in a place that was so international they had to post the name above his head in 3 languages. It's a much more earthy, much more daily life, real life sort of perspective than most institutionalized Christianity starts with. You know, when Jesus called his followers, it wasn't a resume, it wasn't who's most qualified. His selection of people was bizarre. Tax collectors and fishermen and idle philosophers and Pharisees and unwanted women and Samaritans even. I mean, the people he associated with. This is not a recipe for being popular or successful, not by today's standards. And yet there's this incredible paradox, because for all his wrong choices, something got started to the extent that the calendar was supposedly set by the dates of his life. Now, in one sense, we could say, well, that's institutionalized Christianity, it's not Jesus. And in a sense, that's true. And yet it seems to me that there had to be something there to be sufficient fuel for that kind of facade to be built on it. It seems, to me it seems impossible that someone could build something as massive as what Christianity has become on someone who wasn't what they said they were. And yet, in deference to other perspectives, if God is everything that I understand God to be, then there's no way that Christians could be the only ones who have ever seen God since the dawn of time. Other nations, other cultures, other peoples with different life experiences saw something of God and gave it a different terminology and a different system and a different structure. They wrote their theology differently. They hooked the ideas together differently. They had a completely different understanding of what a spiritual teacher was and of what God required. I don't know whether what Jesus actually was was what the biblical account says, or if it might have been something closer to Buddha or Confucius or some other person, or if it might be something completely different than all the above. I know that all of these people have left incredibly strong impressions on human history and on human thought, and on the way we understand what you might generically call the divine. One of the things that was really drilled into my head, though, in Catholic school was that God was alive, and that God was more than we could understand, more than maleness, more than femaleness, more than our definitions of personhood. Putting all that together, it seemed to me that if God was alive, if God is alive, then God must be learning and growing and discovering things too. Becoming ever more God is. Sufficiently farther along the path, so to speak, that I don't expect to ever catch up with God. And so God will always be God to me. Always becoming, always encompassing more than I've ever thought of encompassing within the word God. I find it kind of exciting, and it's wonderful to think about the possibilities in any case. And I guess my opinion is that it keeps going on. That because God is alive, God continues to speak. In nature, in books, in movies, in all sorts of things. If God is anywhere near as omnipresent as the nuns who taught me in grade school said, then anywhere you look, any person you meet, anything you encounter, you could be touching the fingers of God. So, as many other people have said, keep your eyes and ears open and you might learn something. Join me again as we continue this dialogue. Thank you for coming today.